So now that's the push right now, is to make a statewide progressive alliance and also continue building local progressive alliances. So I know Gayle from the campaign trail. I actually hadn't met Gayle until I made a attempt to run for U.S. Senate against one of the most powerful senators in the nation. That didn't work out. But I did meet a lot of people, one of them being Gayle, and I was very enthusiastic about her campaign. I supported her the whole way. We co-endorsed. We saw each other all the time on the campaign trail, and one thing that I noticed is that she was at almost every event. She never gave up. She kept pushing. She's been in this fight for a long time, and she will be in this fight for a long time. And that's what we need to see from all progressives who are really seeking change, both, like David mentioned, other David, both within and outside the party. So with that, I will keep it short because of time. I want to make sure we have a lot of discussion, but I'd like to introduce Gayle, and she can give her speech, and she's the person you're here to see anyway.
Thank you so much. Wow, this is such a wonderful turnout, so I'm really delighted to have so many people here to share the story of Richmond and to share a little bit about what I'm doing now and what many are doing statewide, and also to maybe just give you start out with thanking people. I know many people here I had an opportunity to meet during the campaign, and they were great supporters. So I want to state a big thank you to all there were tens of thousands of activist supporters up and down the state of California for my Lieutenant Governor campaign. And I really, really appreciate it. We did such great work. You know, I got 39 Our Revolution endorsements. I got a dozen Democratic Socialists of America endorsements, plus the National DSA. I got several Green Party chapters and the state Green Party endorsement. I got the Peace and Freedom Party endorsement and the Movement for a People's Party and Socialist Alternative. So the fact that, and just so many social justice groups, the fact that so many different groups on the left saw an opportunity through this campaign that we all ran for Lieutenant Governor, even though we didn't make the top two, we really, really did make headway, because organizations are, excited about the fact that we can come together, regardless of party preference. I ran as an NPP candidate, which is no party preference. And I think that's a good place for me. I mean, I think everybody should work within or outside any party that they want to. But I think I can build relationships, and I have had that opportunity to build relationships with progressive Democrats, with Green Party members, with Peace and Freedom Party members, with socialists. I consider myself a Democratic Socialist. So that relationship building was part of this campaign, and deepening that relationship building is part of the work that we're doing now as we build the California Progressive Alliance. I don't want to go into, I'll touch on that a little bit more at the end, but the thrust of what I want to share with you tonight is the Richmond story and how we built a progressive alliance in Richmond. Richmond is a city across the bay from San Francisco, a very diverse city, and right now we have 5 RPA, we call it the Richmond Progressive Alliance, RPA members that sit on the city council, that are city council members out of 7. So that's a super majority. So it took us about, the RPA started in 2003. By 2016, we had a super majority. I was the first elected council member, corporate free, taking no corporate money. And in spite of Chevron, we have this big oil refinery in the city of Richmond, in spite of Chevron spending millions of dollars, in 2014 they spent $3.5 million to try and defeat me and 2 other progressives. So that shows that they were threatened by our alliance. And, but we all won. All the progressives won, and all the Chevron candidates lost. So it can be done when you build a local movement. So, I want to tell you kind of how we did it. So, of course, there's a lot. You'll determine how you want to build your alliance. Everything is, every group, every city, every region puts forward, things based on your own circumstances. But I think I think people can learn from success stories. And, Richmond is a success story, but we have many challenges that we have to continue to fight. So, it's not like it's all rosy in Richmond, but we did make some incredible transformative change. So what I want to start out by saying is, I mentioned we got 5 out of 7 of the council seats. We won that in spite of Chevron's money. The other things we've done, just to rattle them off a little bit before I give you a 12-point plan for how we did it, and of course, that's really a summary in a thumbnail sketch of how we did it. But here's some of the things we did. We passed a minimum wage to $15 an hour. We passed the first new rent control law in California in 30 years. We were able to reduce crime dramatically. Richmond had a history of high crime. We reduced homicides by 75%. Yeah, and this was I don't think I mentioned, I was served as mayor in Richmond for 2 terms until I termed out. And then I ran for council again. So altogether I served 13 years on the Richmond City Council, 2 terms, 8 years as mayor. So that 75% reduction occurred over the 8 years while I was mayor, and it was because of many people's efforts and building from the root causes of crime, giving people opportunities, really reaching out to those who were in trouble and steering them in the right direction, and having a community-involved police force. And so many, many people were involved in that reduction. We also got over $100 million in additional taxes from Chevron. And that pressure from the community, to really get that fair taxation. And we think we deserve more in Richmond than that from this multi-billion-dollar oil company, but that was a big success. We also sued Chevron for its harm to our community. There was a big fire in 2012. And got some money, not as much again as we would have liked, but $5 million. And then we also did many positive green things. We had a green job training program. We were #1 in the Bay Area for solar installed per capita. We became part of a community choice energy program where our residents now get cleaner, greener, and cheaper sources of energy, sources of electricity. So that's a issue-based approach to how to shift away from this climate change that is destroying our planet. And we fought for our immigrant community. We're a sanctuary city, and so many other things that we did. We fought back an urban casino that a previous city council was trying to set forward to come into our city. We got that out of the way. A lot of community work it took to get where we were and where we are today. So how did we do it? Well, let me share with you the 12-point program. So here's how we started. And here's how you can start. You have to start by being fed up to the point of no return, and saying, we have to become the leaders we're waiting for. So that's step #1. Now, step #2, you have to be aware, and I think you all are, of the betrayals of the corporate. And I know many of you are Democrats, but the corporate Democrats, I know you aren't the corporate Democrats. The corporate Democrats lead, and the corporate Republicans lead. There's a wonderful fight going on within the Democratic Party, and I say go for it, keep going. And as David said, some fight inside the Democratic Party. Some of us, I have no party preference, I'm fighting outside of the Democratic Party. We have to come together. That's what we did in the RPA. So what we did, and we started this in 2003, is we came together based on our progressive values and set aside our party preference. We came together regardless of party or no party preference. Some of us were Progressive Democrats, some were Green Party members, some were Peace and Freedom Party members, some were independents, and we said, what do we all have in common? We want to see a better Richmond, and we think we can do it. Some of us were working on housing issues, some of us were working on fighting Chevron's pollution. Some are working on police brutality. Richmond used to have a big problem with the police before we got our community-involved police force in process. So what we did was say, we're going to come together based on our progressive values, and we're going to build local political power. And we're going to do this in a couple of ways. First of all, we're going to run corporate-free candidates for city council. Candidates who vow to take no corporate money. And this is in a city where the whole city council, prior to the Richmond Progressive Alliance coming about, the whole city council was either in Chevron's hands and had taken Chevron's money to get elected, or they were intimidated by the oil giant. So we said, we're not taking any money from any corporation, and we're going to run candidates, and we're going to win, and we did. The other thing we decided to do was to build a local movement. We say we run candidates to organize a movement, and we organize as we run candidates. So it kind of is a synergistic thing. When you run a local candidate, that candidate becomes an organizer. And I think that's true on any level of government. Those of us who ran on a state level, David, he's wherever David is now. Yeah, there he is. He's part of the organizing this today. You all here are here because you feel the need to organize. My campaign was an organizing campaign. So candidates, and when you get in office, you have to keep organizing. Ideally you win. Sometimes you don't win and you keep the momentum of the campaign going. And that's what I'm doing and David's doing and others are doing. We want to keep the work of the primary that many of us corporate-free candidates helped to build. We want to keep that going. So that's what we did in Richmond. We ran to organize, and we organized as we ran. And that's kind of the philosophy, if you will. So how did it actually start concretely? Well, it was just a few good people in Richmond coming together. As I mentioned, some were working on various issues. We came together and we decided that we'd had it with our city council, and it was time for us to do something. So we decided to meet frequently. So that's why it's great to hear you have a follow-up meeting already planned. You have to keep the momentum going. And we also needed trust. We needed trust because our founding group knew that sometimes we were going to be discussing sensitive things, and there were other groups, the more establishment groups in the city, that would try and co-opt us, and you had to be independent in your thinking and say that kind of alliance or coalition you build is something new, and you have your own integrity. You don't want to be a part of the machine. You want to start something new regardless of party preference. So we needed that trust. So we had frank discussions with one another, and so it has to be people that aren't going to go and talk to another group and have that group sort of try and take membership away from your group. And we needed vision. We knew that we had to have a long-term vision because we might have defeats along the way, and we were going to still stick together. We decided no matter what, we were going to keep going forward. We got going and we're never turning back. So we adopted the name Alliance. And Alliance, because we're people from different political backgrounds and different political perspectives, from different parties, but the vision is very much the same. Maybe not exactly the same. You don't have to agree on everything, but has the basic fundamental vision of creating an equitable society, a just society, a democratic society, a society with ecological wisdom and social justice, economic justice, environmental justice. So that was kind of the nature of what we wanted to create. So let me just give you sort of the four points here as to how the RPA was conceived as an organization. Number one, to get corporate-free representatives elected. Two, to help these representatives be successful in carrying out their pledges by research, advice, and legwork. The community has a strong role in helping the candidates, and the candidate, of course, has a strong role in terms of standing for the community, and when they're elected, continuing to work shoulder to shoulder with the community. Number 3, to mobilize support to back up these representatives on key issues, and to strengthen, number 4 is to strengthen the link between the representatives and the progressive movements. I mean, there is sometimes various movements in a city. I'm sure there are in Sacramento, and you really want to link those movements together, but strengthen the link between the candidates that you support and these movements. So another, number 6 here on the overall 12-point plan is to identify viable candidates. Now, what is a viable candidate? What does being a candidate mean? And how do you learn to be a candidate? By becoming a candidate. You learn as you go. What do you have to have? You have to have good values. You have to have a willingness to collaborate with the community and with others in your campaign team, and recognize that you're going to stand true to your values and your vision. So we think that you don't have to be an expert in government. You just have to be someone who's willing to take on a new pathway and forge that new pathway, not alone. You have the community with you, and many of you in this room could be a candidate. I can assure you, when I first became a candidate in 2004, I had never thought about running for city council or anything, and I thought, well, I could do this and just be a voice of the progressive movement in our city, never thinking I'd win. But lo and behold, because of the progressive support in the city, the progressive movement, I won, and I learned further through the office of council member. So what are some of the key roles and tools of a progressive political campaign? So you got to have a candidate, you have a campaign manager, a treasurer. Again, the treasurer learns as he goes from the city clerk and from the federal FPPC, Federal Political Practices Committee, I think that's called, Commission, thank you. You have to have an outreach coordinator, a fundraising coordinator, a database person, a media coordinator, and of course a social media coordinator these days. And the RPA eventually got our own electronic newsletter. We call it The Activist, that we put out lots of messages to our membership. You also need to get an electronic copy of the voters in your district or your city. And you want to do things like reach out to all the organizations, exactly what's happening here today. Many of you represent so many organizations. You want to reach out as a campaign team to let them know, who are you? Who are your candidates? What is your organization? And what do you stand for? There's a whole bunch of other things. We now in Richmond have a printed media as well called the Richmond Sun, which we fundraise for and then distribute. Sometimes we mail it to all the voters. Sometimes we go door to door and put it out during campaigns and during non-election years as well. So one of the first things that we did in the RPA, like I said, we identified candidates. It was me and another Latino gentleman who was a great activist. Unfortunately, he didn't make it. I did. I wished he had made it, so I had company on that Chevron-controlled city council, but unfortunately I was alone. Later, more people came on. But the first forum we held was called A Dialogue on Richmond. And we brought people together. We introduced the candidates, myself and Andres, and we had some other speakers, some community issue-based speakers, and we also heard from the community, a big open dialogue. So that's important. When you form your organization, you want to put it out there, invite all the organizations that you know, and if you're running, if you don't have candidates yet, you still want them to know about the organization that you're starting, and introduce them to it, hear their issues. Then what we did, we actually had we had Dennis Kucinich in 2004 come to Richmond. So we teamed up with the Dennis Kucinich campaign and did our second forum with Dennis Kucinich. So that was a packed house, and that was a another opportunity. So I spoke, Andre spoke, and of course Dennis was our main speaker. And that brought in more people. And the press comes. You got to reach out to the press. Let them know about your organization so that, they talk about it on in the newspapers, on the radio, on TV. You really want to get their communication out. And then later in 2004, I think it was July maybe, we ended up having a Richmond People's Convention. And we did this in concert with SEIU 1021. The city was really in bad shape at that point financially, and there was a financial debacle, and they were laying off lots of people, and SEIU was hit the hardest. Police and fire weren't hit that hard, but SEIU took a big hit. So we of course teamed up with SEIU, and we still are very supportive of SEIU. And we had a wonderful People's Convention where all the candidates, even if they weren't RPA candidates, were invited. And we had butcher paper, and we put out the issues of the day, what was the issues for Richmond community, and the candidates, checked off what they supported. And of course, all, myself and Andres are yes, 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 yes. We supported all the issues because we had been involved with the community by that time. Well, we had been activists even before the RPA, so we were quite, we knew the issues and we were there with the community. But we also want to, when you form an alliance, you also want to make sure that you hear from the community, because sometimes progressives, we think we know the issues of the day or of the community, and then you talk to somebody in the neighborhood who isn't an activist, and they tell you some issues that they're dealing with that you haven't heard about and you don't know about. So you want to know what are the hot issues for the community in your city or in your region. And then the other thing we did over time was we made sure that not only did we form our alliance was an alliance of individuals for the most part. Now I know this group that you're forming may be a little different, and other progressive alliances have formed as an alliance of organizations. So you could do it the way you want. We were, a city of 110,000, so we came together as individuals. But then, as we started forming our alliance and it was growing, and I was on the council, and we had, mobilizations happening on the key issues, coming to council meetings, supporting me. I was championing, stopping development on this toxic land, and there was the community saying, absolutely, we did it together. We stopped some really horrible development that would have been built right on top of a Superfund site. So we really, we mobilized to pressure the other council members to get on board. But what we also had to do was build coalitions. So the RPA was one important central organization. But when we had heavy-duty issues, like, let me go forward a little bit, like in 2016 when we passed the rent control ballot measure, we formed a coalition with 19 other organizations. So we reached out. It was the RPA, it was SEIU, it was ACE, the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment. We just reached out to every group possible, including the urban gardening group in the city, because everybody, of course the tenants together, everybody was feeling the crunch, and still is in many ways, of rents raising, exorbitantly high. So building coalitions on issues is very, very important. Number 11 here is meet often. And I think I mentioned that already. You got to meet often in order to keep the momentum going. And also to be really absolutely unwavering about this importance of not taking money from corporations, because you cannot, not only the candidates, but the organization, the alliance itself, because you can't serve two masters. You can't serve the people and the corporations. Democracy is for people. Corporations are private entities, they're for profit. Democracy is for people. So we made sure that we didn't take any corporate money. Candidates that we were supporting, myself and later others, didn't take any corporate money. We did take money from unions, and some people say, well, you take money from unions. Well, unions are people, you know? Corporations are not people. Unions are people joining together to fight for the rights of people. And so we think that, you know, we didn't line up with every union. You know, the police union attacked me, so we didn't line up with them, that's for sure. But we did line up with, you know, good unions like SEIU. So number 12 here, the final one, is when you campaign, start early. We started in January of, you know, the campaign year for the November election in 2004. And in subsequent years, we also started early, maybe not as early as January. But what is the best way to protect a candidate against a well-financed smear campaign? Well, it's for the candidate to have already met and talked with and listened to thousands and thousands of voters. So you have to be out there listening to the voters. And then when Chevron or some other big corporation attacks you, you know, the voters are already know who you are, and they've already developed trust in you. So I think that, and I'm going to leave this with David. It's a pamphlet that my campaign manager wrote, and with some input from me and someone else. And he ran all 4 of my campaigns in Richmond, which we won them all, and he also ran my lieutenant governor campaign, which we didn't win, but we did some good organizing work. So this is the way Juan puts it. After a campaign, he says, well, after some well-deserved rest, we find ourselves ready to start the process again. In every non-election year, we build further our local progressive alliance and attract and incorporate more members and supporters. We advance in local political power, knowing that no city can solve all its problems alone, and we try to connect with people doing similar efforts nearby and throughout the state. So that's kind of the sense. You know, you run and you organize, and then you take a little rest after a campaign, and then you keep the organizing going on the issues of your city to, you know, help the elected officials that you've endorsed and are now on the council or on the school board or anywhere. It always has to continue year in and year out, and then you start it all over again, knowing that you have to keep getting more and more people on the political body that you're working to virtually take over, virtually put progressives in charge. So that's a little bit of the insight as to how we did it in Richmond. We have a video that kind of talks about that, some of the things I've talked about as well. And you can see it on the Richmond Progressive Alliance.net website. A lot of what I talked about in much more detail is in this book. I'm just going to read some of the titles of the chapters. So it starts out with Richmond, a window to our nation. We think Richmond is a diverse city that kind of gives an example of the diversity of our nation. Then it gives a little bit of my personal story, how I got into politics and into activism. And then it talks about the birth of our movement, waging a people's campaign, shaking things up, new governance. That's what we were all about. Win or lose, fighting for Richmond. And then baptism by fire. When my first year of mayor was pretty just had to absorb a lot of things happening very quickly. And then it talked about everything from greening our city to getting fair taxation, walking the talk. We had some bad council members on board that were very attacking and hostile. So we talk about disruptive waters, a pirate on board, and then disruptive industry, Chevron explodes. And then the art of governing and a symphony of successes, then housing, a space odyssey that talks about during the foreclosure crisis. Some of you may have heard of the eminent domain program, where we in Richmond tried to help our homeowners by seeking to acquire underwater mortgages from the big banks because it was created, if they were evicted, first of all, we wanted to help our homeowners, but if they were evicted and foreclosed upon, it'd create more blight for our city, more crime with empty homes. So we said, it's a public purpose. We will acquire this mortgage and reduce the principal for our residents so that they can stay in their homes and keep our neighborhood stable. So we tried that program. Unfortunately, Wall Street got to Congress. That's why when you have corporate and big banks financing the campaigns of elected officials, they do their bidding after they're elected. So what Congress did was put a bill in place that said any public entity that acquired a mortgage by eminent domain could not get government insurance. And mortgages needed to be insured, and we were going to use government insurance. So that stopped it. But, with a different Congress, if need be, we could resurrect that program. Let's see what else, just as we finish up this. Then it talks about how I visited some other places. You always tie the local struggle to the international. I think that's important. Most of the work in a city is done on the issues of the city or the region, if it's a regional board. But you should always try and tie, connect the dots to the international struggle. Whether it's the fight for Palestinian rights, whether it's the fight for indigenous community members in Ecuador who were also battling Chevron. I got invited by President Correa to come as mayor to Ecuador to see the damage that Chevron was responsible for in the Ecuadorian rainforest. So I went there, and it's great to have solidarity with people in other countries. We were fighting Chevron, they were fighting Chevron. So there's something about some of the, and we did some work with the Haiti Action Committee and other groups. So, and then it just goes on. The last couple of chapters are about how we finally got our supermajority, and then how I decided to run this campaign for lieutenant governor to encourage more progressive alliances and to really hopefully win and continue to organize. And then when we didn't win, for many reasons, it's a big state, and we had hoped, even though I got the National Our Revolution endorsement, we had hoped Bernie himself would come out and, because his voice would have, reached so many progressives and got them to come out. But he just, for whatever his reasons, chose not to endorse any statewide candidates, And he had endorsed me. I have a picture of him and me in the back when I ran on a local level, so I was grateful for that. And of course, he's continuing to do what he does, and hoping for 2020 to see something happen with him as well. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to run down some questions that David had asked, and then I'm going to finish and have you all ask questions either of me or for the kind of alliance that you may be seeking to form. So David was asking, what is the structure of the RPA? Individual membership or affiliation through party groups and other organizations? So I mentioned we are an individual membership organization, but what I didn't mention was that we evolved over the years. We became a membership group. At first, our membership was only $12 a year, or whatever you could pay. Now it's a little higher. We have an office, and that has a charge to it, and the rent keeps going up. So it's $60 a year. I'm sorry, a year. It was $12 a year. Now it's $60 a year, or whatever you can pay. If lots of people in Richmond can't pay that, so we, whatever you can pay or nothing, you still can be a member. But we don't do it through party groups because, like I said, we set party aside. So there's no representatives of the Democratic Party or representatives of the Green Party, or, but there are people who have registration in those parties, but no party groups. Now, are the representative bodies chosen by members? So we have a steering committee, and I have a copy of the bylaws that I'm going to also leave with David. I think our bylaws say 12 to 29 members. And in this bylaws it says we elect every year. We changed that to now every 2 years. The way it works is that there's a nominating committee that the steering committee appoints, and they reach out to current steering committee members and would-be steering committee members and put together a slate. The steering committee reviews it and decides whether they want to recommend that slate to the membership. Membership meetings happen 4 times a year. Steering committee meetings happen monthly, and membership has to ratify whatever the recommendation of the steering committee is, or modify it. Or you could have nominations. We always ask 2 weeks in advance of the membership meeting if somebody wants to nominate themselves or someone else. Please let the steering committee know so that they could put that out to the membership. So it's truly democratic. Have there been, whether to get involved? How do we get involved in an electoral race? Again, it's a question of sometimes we bring forward candidates and encourage them to run, and just kind of, they call it grooming, although I never like that word, grooming candidates, but, encouraging someone to run. Other times people will just come to the RPA and say, I'm going to run. And then there's a process that the RPA has, and a questionnaire they have to fill out. The first question is, do you vow to take no corporate money? And then other questions are, issues of that election year. So the steering committee, puts out the questionnaire. Candidates are interviewed. The steering committee makes a recommendation again to the membership, and the membership approves or not. What, if any, position to take on an issue that's not electoral, and whether or how much to get involved in working on it? So the RPA does not take positions on every single issue of the city. The city council members that are also RPA members, and I could tell you, for having been on the city council for 13 years, you sometimes have to make decisions on the spot, and that some decisions are not fundamentally strong issues that that the RPA or the progressive community or the citizens as a whole are all that concerned about. But there are fundamental issues, and those issues the RPA will take positions on, and the membership will ratify them, and the expectation is that the RPA council members will vote as the membership wants them to. I mean, whether it's like an issue about Chevron's pollution, or an issue about building a development on toxic land. These are things that progressives agree on, and the expectation is that the RPA council members are going to support the community in that. How close to consensus do you get? We try always to get consensus. We learned early on that you have to go with simple majority, because sometimes you can't reach consensus. So simple majority is the fallback. Candidate endorsements. RPA typically endorses candidates, is it asking here, who have announced on their own, and I already said that. Some have announced on their own and come to the RPA and ask for an interview. Other times we encourage members, we really encourage leadership, and ask people to step up to the plate and tell them they'll have the support they need. How do you deal with the fact that some political parties and clubs, while affiliated with the RPA, have their own endorsement process that must be followed according to their bylaws? So first of all, because we are an individual organization, I don't know if I mentioned we had 4 seats on the steering committee that we now have 4 organizations. SEIU has a seat, ACE has a seat, California Nurses Association has a seat, and there was an LGBTQ group that had a seat, and racial justice. There's only 4, so I think one group may have moved away and another group taken place, but we wanted that. We wanted to have some of our close allies to be on the steering committee. But we don't have, people may be involved in their local Democratic club or their local Green Party club, and that's fine. But when they're in the RPA steering committee or membership, they have their RPA hat on. Now, now SEIU is an example of something that doesn't quite work that way, because the SEIU representative, SEIU will make endorsements, And so the SEIU representative might not be able to vote on the RPA endorsed or candidates that are up for endorsement if SEIU has yet to do their endorsement process, because that person has to adhere to the unions, because she is there as a representative of the union. So that's an exception, and probably CNA as well. But in general, people are not in there representing a party, so that doesn't come into play. And we do, it says, do you endorse for or against ballot measures? Absolutely. Do you even initiate them? Yes. We initiated the fair taxation measure to tax Chevron. We initiated the rent control ballot measure. We initiated a soda tax. We lost the soda tax measure, unfortunately, because of this big soda came in town and tried to split the community, and unfortunately they had some success. So how do you envision, so now we're getting a little bit on the statewide alliance. How do I envision the California Progressive Alliance generally and in relationship to the above questions? Now, the California Progressive Alliance is an alliance, or the vision is to have it an alliance of organizations. I mentioned that there was 100 groups that endorsed me in my campaign. I would love to bring all those groups together and more. That's why I'm doing more road trips, going around the state, encouraging groups to at least give like a nod of support. We're not asking for official membership yet of the CPA, the California Progressive Alliance, but we're asking people to stay tuned. We're having our founding convention in February coming up. So we don't want to get too involved until we have our convention. Again, it's going to be democratically run, and we'll have our own process for endorsing candidates. It'll be corporate free. That's one thing I'm strong on, and everybody else who's in this kind of founding group is very strong on. Got to only endorse corporate free candidates, but it could be of any party. It could be Progressive Democrats, it could be Green Party members. That we want to have a conversation. So David mentioned how there are several progressives running, several corporate free progressives running sometimes, and we want to have that conversation. Maybe someone who was going to run would step back and say, hey, let's all gather around this one person so we don't split up the strong progressive vote. So that's the reason that we're communicating through the CPA. We also have my former campaign consultant is now a volunteer with the California Progressive Alliance. Very strong technical person. I mean, we have tens of thousands of supporters that played a role in my campaign. So we have lists of many email lists, phone numbers, lots of expertise in terms of texting and Facebook, social media. So Adriel Hampton is excellent on all that. So we want to put his talents to work, and he's thankfully part of this. We also want to bring issue-based organizations into the California Progressive Alliance. Right now there's Prop 10 to repeal Costa-Hawkins, and we're got to keep working to get that passed. And in LA there's a Public Bank LA ballot measure, and so that's a good thing to support, because if LA can get a public bank, it'll really help other cities and regions, and maybe the state get a public bank, and the nation at some point. The whole idea is to come together and to do some research too, so that we could pressure the legislature with new, bold legislation, and then of course oppose and support legislation that comes forward, bills that come forward. But we really want to be a repository of good legislation. So those are some of the things that the California Progressive Alliance can do. And the last question David asks is, how do you envision connections with nationwide groups, such as National Our Revolution? We consider it very complementary. We're all working toward the same goal. Bernie, who launched Our Revolution, ran a corporate-free campaign. He ran a campaign for economic justice and all the issues that we all support, I'm sure. So we, National OR and all the local chapters in California are very much on the same page. We just think that we need a statewide organizing effort to connect everybody, you know, the ORs, but also the socialist groups and the, you know, the Green Party chapters, Peace and Freedom, all these groups, and the no party preference voters. There's 5 million NPPs in California, and we really want to find a way to organize them, get them out to the polls, get them activated on issues, so that we have a more active and empowered California. So I'm going to end there. I'm going to say, please, if you haven't had a chance to get a copy, $15. The bulk, thanks to the bookstore, thank you very much. The bulk of the money is going to go to the California Progressive Alliance to help fund some travel, and we put out email. We have over 100,000 on our email list, and sometimes that has a modest cost to it to put out that level of emails. So it'll go for that, and it'll go for planning our convention in February. So I'll end there. Thank you for your attention.
So I'm Mariana. At this time, we're going to take questions, or if you have any comments, please raise your hand. Go ahead.
Let me just ask, did everybody get the sign-in sheet? Get around everywhere?
So you're talking about past rent control and Richmond, and how did you do that with
So cities can pass rent control right now, but the only units that can be rent controlled are buildings that were built before 1995 or 94. So in Richmond, we have 10,000 units that were built before, in buildings that were built before 1995. But there are, you know, probably twice as many, I mean, half of Richmond rents. So there's, you know, quite a bit of renters that we haven't been able to protect because of Costa-Hawkins. So if Costa-Hawkins passes, it will allow us to protect all renters. To repeal, I'm sorry, we want to repeal Costa-Hawkins, and that's Prop 10. So vote yes on Prop 10 to repeal this law, Costa-Hawkins, that doesn't allow us to protect all renters, so that we can indeed protect all renters.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about, about a Bank of Richmond, why there is no Bank of Richmond. But I also like to ask about efforts to expand the economic model of the Arizmendi Bakery. Is it in Richmond?
The what? I'm sorry?
Arizmendi Bakery?
Oh, yeah. So one of the places I went when I said I tied to international struggles, and when I was mayor, I took 3 trips abroad, only 22 days over my whole 8 years, which, you know, Chevron tried to attack me as never being in Richmond. 22 days out of 8 years, and the community knew that I wasn't away from Richmond. I was out there with them all the time, so they disregarded that and voted me back in as the top candidate. This was when I was running for council. After I turned out as mayor, I came in the top candidate among all the council candidates. But going to Mondragon, Spain was something I did for, I think it was 7 days. And that's where they have the co-op, that's kind of the co-op, the worker-owned co-op capital of the world. And I learned about co-ops, came back to Richmond, and we started up some co-ops, and we educated the community about it. We did several community programs. In fact, my office, the office of the mayor, hired someone who was a founder of Arizmendi Bakery. We don't have an Arizmendi Bakery in Richmond. There's one in Berkeley, there's one in San Rafael. I don't know other places. I think there are as well. We would love to have an Arizmendi Bakery in Richmond, but at this point, it doesn't happen.
What about city services being provided by worker co-ops?
Say that again?
What about city services being provided by worker co-ops?
Oh, that would be what, you know, we did have some catering co-ops, And the whole concept, and we made it happen, was that every community event that the city held, they used the co-op, cooperatives for the catering. So those are wonderful opportunities that the city can play a role in helping really keep co-ops afloat. What did you say?
Richmond.
There is no Bank of Richmond. I wish there was. Richmond and Berkeley and Oakland put in funds together to do a study on public banks for perhaps a regional public bank. So I don't think the results of that study came back. We have talked about public banks in Richmond. It hasn't happened yet, but I really think we could do a regional one or even a city one. That would be great. So we have a credit union. We have a couple credit unions in Richmond, but public bank is something different. It's not run for profit. It's run for the public good. So it's really a more efficient and economic approach to banking. Cities don't have to float bonds with the big banks and pay all the interest. You could utilize the public bank to deal with the needs of the cities.
Before the RPA achieved the supermajority, did you wind up having to make awkward compromises?
So yes, I'll repeat the question. The question was, before there were more council members on board, more RPA council members, before the supermajority, did I have to make compromises? For the most part, I didn't, I'll tell you that. Yes, there were times when I would have to, but I held to my principles, and that's what I would recommend. You don't have to water down your politics to serve in office. You could put out those protest votes, like if you, there was a bad Chevron project where they wanted to refine heavier, dirtier crude, and I voted no on it. The majority voted yes, and then the environmental groups took the city and Chevron to court because of it, and the environmental groups won. So those of us who voted in the minority, were vindicated that we were on the right side. So yes, sometimes you have, if it's an issue that, hey, do you want to, where do you want to put the sewer, is it go here or a block here, or, things, or what kind of lighting do you want to put in your parks, and, we always try to be efficient and green. I'd always promote that, but sometimes you can make some compromises. But on the big issues, I held my ground, and I'm glad I did, because as more and more people came on board to support the RPA vision, as we got, for 4 years I was the lone voice. Even 2 years as mayor, I was the only RPA member. So I had a lot of protest votes. But then, when I got another person, and eventually 5, we were able to do the things that, I was the only one supporting rent control in 2005 when I was on the council. By 2016, we had a majority on the council supporting rent control, and we did pass it as a city council. Then the apartment association did a referendum and lied to the community and got enough signatures to overturn it. So then we said, we're not going to be defeated. We're going out and collect signatures and put a ballot measure on. So we did, and that's how we won rent control. But at first I had to put out my voice to support rent control, even though I was outnumbered. So, yeah.
First of all, thank you for coming here today and sharing the story of the Richmond Progressive Alliance. I'm curious about how successful the Alliance has been with respect to recruiting the younger generation, and at this point, since I'm 33 now, I guess that means under 40 for me, millennials, basically. And what advice would you have for someone who's trying to, because I've noticed around here that most of the time when you're at an event, it seems like just about everybody who's involved with local politics or the local community is over 40. If you want to try to organize people under 40, how would you go about that?
Yeah, so we made an active outreach to younger people, to more people of color. Richmond is a very diverse city. We always made our steering committee as diverse as possible, but we wanted it even more diverse. So we went out and went into the groups that people of color were involved in, and we asked them, what can we do to improve the RPA? We asked their ideas, and we now have a majority people of color on the steering committee, a majority women, and we have a lot of young people. I'm not under 40. And in fact, our city council is very young. We have 2 members of the council in their 20s, both RPA members, one just around 40. So we, and the others are, Jovanka's she's probably around 50. And Eduardo's, I think, a little older, more closer to my age, in his 60s. Yes, we want to recruit more and more millennials. I don't know, at one time, a year ago, 2 years ago, it was nearly half of the steering committee was under 40. Not enough in their 20s, but under 40. And so at this point, I'm not sure the recent steering committee, but we do have a fair amount of young people, and we want the membership to be as young and fresh, and of course we want those with experience as well, those of us who have been around for a while, but we definitely want young people. So you have to actively recruit. We did, and we have to keep doing more.
Thank you for being here. I was wondering, I know that any alliance like yours has a lot on its plate. But I was wondering whether organizations like yours have any bandwidth to support systemic structural change. Because, and I was moved to amend, which I think, as everybody knows, is trying to get rid of all corporate constitutional rights, not just the First Amendment, money to speech, but the 4th, 5th, 14th, Commerce Clause, Supremacy Clause, you name it. And because what I'm seeing is that even when we get to enact like benign legislation, say, to protect the environment, the corporations come to the court and they say, excuse me, we have a constitutional right. This violates our constitutional right under whatever amendment they choose to rely on, and therefore, following Supreme Court precedent, you have to invalidate this work that has been done. It's completely, and it's a slam dunk, because once the court decides that something is in that an enactment, like say a fracking ban, violates the Fifth Amendment takings clause or preemption under the Supremacy Clause, that's it. There's no discussion on the merits, and the thing is overturned. So, and I mean, there's an example. There was a fracking ban in New Mexico, and not only did the federal court, following the Supreme Court precedent, invalidate the ban, but they fined the cell deaf lawyers for even defending this ordinance. I mean, the way the Supreme Court is misinterpreted, inventing corporate constitutional rights, can completely undo all of our good work.
Right. Absolutely, yeah. So systemic issues like overturning Citizens United and what you're talking about in terms of other aspects of the Constitution that need amending is really, really key also. And many people have talked about a constitutional assembly or something to really talk about how we could change things. And sometimes our Constitution just isn't, people don't use it enough. Like cities are often settling cases when they could be taken to trial. They're not used.
They can't afford to.
I know, but at the same time, the right to a fair trial is something that we have as a constitutional right, and the public has that right in general as a city representing the public. So yes, I think we passed a resolution to oppose or to support the overturning of Citizens United. We put it on the ballot as a city council. It passed to pressure our assembly people to stand for that constitutional amendment. We often talked about in our crimes issues in Richmond that we had to look at the systemic causes of crime, and that is, people not having opportunity. So we tried to look, there's racial injustices, there's, just capitalism has wreaked havoc on poor people and working class people. So we try and, address the core and the systemic problems that we have. And an example is, we reduced crime in one way by creating an Office of Neighborhood Safety, and we had outreach teams that were made up of formerly incarcerated individuals who were coming out of prison and who had turned their lives around. And we hired them, the city hired them, as part of these outreach teams because they knew how to reach the young people who were involved getting in trouble and sometimes very serious trouble, and they quelled the violence before it began and steered these young people into whatever substance abuse programs, anger management, job training, education programs. So when you look at the systemic causes rather than trying to stamp out crime with police, constantly. You have to look at the underlying causes. So yes, I'm 100% on board with that, and I think we try, in Richmond we have tried, and I'm sure the council currently keeps trying to address that, and the constitutional thing is something that I think is really, really important for all of us to get on board with.
The biggest impediment we have is the law.
There you go. Yeah, there are bad laws, and we have to change
Well, the legal structure.
Yeah.
The Constitution, as it's been interpreted itself.
Okay. All right.
Is
Yeah.
hurting us.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing that work.
So you mentioned that you got some resistance from the cops, but I'm curious about the other city departments. Did you get resistance from staff, or like, for example, the city manager that you replaced, that kind of thing?
Yes. So the question is, I mentioned how the police union attacked me and other progressives during the campaign. When I ran for re-election as mayor, they put out a big bulletin board or big billboards all over the city saying the mayor won't listen to us because that was a protest vote. I didn't vote for the increase in their pension, which was already bloated beyond belief, and SEIU wasn't getting anything. But then the disability brigade started making homemade signs, putting them all around the city, saying the mayor listens to us. So you have that kind of stuff going on. Now your question is, what about other city departments? So sometimes staff was reluctant on some things. Our city manager has been pretty good on most things. People like him. He's actually retiring in a couple of months. But I've had disagreements with him, and there have been departmental issues that, for example, I brought forward a ban on glyphosate. We all know Roundup, and I brought that forward, in 2013. A resident, actually my campaign manager, who is a epidemiologist, also he was like on top of the fact that Roundup, glyphosate causes cancer, and the city has to stop using it. I brought forward a ban on it. The Public Works Department, the Parks and Landscaping did not want to stop using glyphosate because, then I said, well, let's research the alternatives. There's, you could use mulch to, keep weeds from growing. You could, part of it is weed whacking or pulling weeds by hand. So we did a year moratorium. And, they still didn't like it, but they had to live by it. The council approved it. And then the next year, we kept it going. So now, the city does not use. In fact, I just had, even though I'm not on the council, I had an email exchange with the Parks and Landscaping person because another city asked me what are the alternatives Richmond is using since it has a ban on glyphosate. And he came back, Parks guy, department head came back and said, we're using mulch and weed whacking, and that's what we're using for now. He says it's kind of hard. They're understaffed, I understand that. but you know, you can't have cancer-producing products out there. It's really important. So yes, I think a change in the culture of City Hall happened over time, though. With me as mayor, that's why it's good if you can, you know, first get people on City Council, but then if somebody can run for mayor. Right now, by the way, somebody asked about young people. We have a 28-year-old RPA member who's on the council now running for mayor in this November. He's going to be great. But when you're mayor, you could set a tone for the city, and the departments come along. You know, they know the mayor's wanting this, and the council is, you know, going along. So I think we were able to create a change in City Hall as a whole.
Madam Mayor, thanks for coming all the way up here to Sacktown. We really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
No, I don't believe that I've ever seen anything like this before. You know, when I was active, you know, in my early period, we had this group here, we had that group here, we had SDS, we had SNCC, and various organizations. But they were always separated, and the left never really got together. Unions, SEIU, AFT, various and sundry. But this is the first time I've seen an attempt at a real alliance. And I think that if this works out, this will be very, very positive development.
Thank you very much. I think you're right. I mean, we've had a history of decades of the left being fragmented. And, you know, I think we started on a city level, and I think David Hildebrand mentioned that many other progressive alliances have started, some regional. You may want a regional one, Sacramento area, not just the city. Others are city-oriented. There's, you know, San Diego Progressive Alliance. There's South Bay, San Jose, that's a regional progressive alliance. There's one up north, the North Coast People's Alliance, Pacifica Progressive Alliance. Very, you know, they've modeled themselves after the RPA to some extent. And if we could get this California Progressive Alliance going and network ourselves together, then California might be a leader for other states doing similarly, because ultimately the left nationally needs to come together. And it's people have tried. I know I've been in groups that have tried. So we decided to tackle our small city first, and it seems to have some waves that it's making across the state, and we think that's good too. So thank you. Thank you for your activism as well. I mean, all of us stand on the shoulders of the work done in past decades. None of us could be doing what we're doing without that.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to second what this gentleman just said. It's wonderful to have this, you know, coming together of different groups, you know, and getting together. One thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, it's wonderful to tap into popular issues that, you know, people are into, but it's also, you know, part of the, you know, people who lead is to bring up issues that are not really discussed as much in the mainstream media. And a few things, I know you consider local and state issues generally, but in general, on the national level and the international level, one thing is, it reminds me of what Robert Reich, obviously this revolutionary Marxist, I'm just kidding, you know, a person was saying that 2/3 of the discretionary budget goes towards defense and security, which is like, so everybody's fighting over that 1/3 piece of the pie that's left. That issue is not really being, you know, in the mainstream topic discussions on the left in general. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, as it ties, you know, that issue ties into other issues international. What, you know, like in Yemen is the worst humanitarian disaster in the world based on EU and UN, and, you know, a lot of people acknowledge that. But again, you go to mainstream, you go to the public, if you go even to the left, it's almost like a non-existent issue. You know, same thing with Palestinian to some degree.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You know, the war machine is big. I mean, sometimes many of us have been involved in the anti-war movement, you know, going back to Vietnam, or you know, in the Iraq situation, and it seems like it's just non-existent, or not very very much in the mainstream conversation, like you say. So we have to bring it back. It's quite clear that the U.S. has done incredible damage, Yemen being one, you know, and you know, supporting Israel's military attacks on the Palestinians, another, and just all the, I mean, I put a resolution forward to the city council at one time, which was passed about all the places that the U.S. has military involvement in. So we did try and at least bring that conversation. We went, supported stopping the military recruiters from coming into our high schools. So you can do things on a local level that have national, repercussions and national connections. But I do think it isn't talked about enough. And in fact, that's why when people run for Congress or Senate, like I was like kind of envious that they were able to bring out those conversations about our foreign policy and our war budget more. I mean, running on a statewide level, it's not a state level. I would bring it out anyway, because I think even on a local level, you can bring it out and you should. That should be part of the dialogue of progressives. But people who are running for Congress or Senate obviously have those national issues on their platform, and I always like to see people speak up about it. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, and it's terrible. We got to keep it up.
Recently in Davis, we have been looking at police accountability, and the question was asked at a city council meeting, and I think it was of the police chief. What are you doing to hire police that don't have this mentality that leads to the problems? And they were saying that cities like yours that were trying to hire police that had a different view of the world were having trouble finding people to cover the police. I mean, people to take the job. Is that true?
Well, we hired a police, actually our city manager. The city manager hires the police chief in Richmond. He's hired a good community-involved police officer, Chris Magnus, who got national attention for some of the great work he did with changing the culture of the police department to a community-involved police force. He actually stood out on a Black Lives Matter protest in uniform with the Black Lives Matter sign, and that got national attention. So, but we had pushed for community-involved policing for a long time, and we were glad that it finally happened. I think it's these days people aren't wanting to be a police officer as much as they used to, because I've heard that anyway. So maybe there's less of a pool to pick from, but they need to, for those who are becoming police officers, they need to, in the training and schooling, it needs to be clear that we need a different type of policing than what we've seen, unfortunately, with all the police brutality, the racial profiling. And so I don't know if they were having problems with not having enough people to choose from, or the people that they did have to choose from didn't have the mentality or the correct thinking about a different way of policing. Chris Magnus, like I said, was in Richmond and did a great job, but he's no longer in Richmond. He went to Tucson, Arizona. He figured he was young enough to help another city. So we lost him, and I think there's some issues going on currently. Hopefully, I'm not on the council, so I don't have the latest report. What I can say, though, that there is a civilian way to address this, and that's through a police commission. Richmond has a police oversight review commission. Oh, good. Excellent. That's very, very important. We strengthened ours a couple of years back so that if there is any kind of a police action that results in death or even serious injury, the police commission automatically starts an independent investigation. So that's a stronger than I think any police commission ordinance in the nation at this time. So we want other cities. You might want to. I could send you the ordinance if you want. Yeah, please do. Just email. My email, by the way, if anyone wants to email me, is Gayle, Gayle, direct @gmail.com. pretty easy.
I just wanted to share that I feel really hopeful. And I really appreciate your positive energy, and I appreciate that this conversation wasn't dystopian and that we're talking about ideas for the future, assuming there will be a future, you know, and I just really appreciate it. And just in the 20 years now that I've been doing activism in Sacramento, I feel like it gets better and better each year, that our groups get more intersectional. Every time I go to Black Lives Matter, there's Trans Lives Matter contingent. You know, when I go to ICE stuff, there's an indigenous movement there, and I just love it. I was on a national webinar with the National Lawyers Guild today, and the speakers were excellent. And so I just think it's a good time. I had heard like the Palestinian issue doesn't come up enough in the Yemen issue, and I think people are really interested in, you know, ties to Saudi Arabia and Russia and who's funding which side. I think there are a lot of people just getting involved now, just starting to engage, and I kind of feed off their energy, and I think it's really good. I think this could happen.
I thank you for saying that. I agree that this optimism or this hopefulness is something that happens when we come together, you know, and I think as progressives, we're building a new culture, a new culture, and not a political culture, even just a new way of looking at the world, and that's we can build links and solidarity with one another and resolve our problems and survive and really do well for ourselves and future generations. So that's a hopeful thing to me, and I get that same inspiration from others that are involved.
I think we have time for a couple more. I'm not wanting to close it out yet, but a real segue from what Amrit and Gayle just said is that this meeting was organized by a kind of ad hoc self-appointed committee of about 4 or 5 of us, and we were winging it. And we came out of one particular organization that we work with together. I think most of us are members of other organizations too. The last thing we wanted to be is sectarian. So I just want to throw out here the invitation. We'll probably need to have like a couple meetings to plan the September 9th meeting. If anybody else here would like to join that committee to work on planning it and figuring out how we orchestrate the next steps, please talk to either Mariana or me or David in the back. We'll take and give us your information, and we'll add you to the committee, because we would like to make it as open and inclusive as possible. Okay?
Yeah, what you said, David, right there was you don't want to be sectarian and you don't want to be co-opted. It's kind of like the extremes of people not working together or letting themselves be co-opted by a more establishment group. So it's kind of an art, you know. And I feel like, you know, this group has the capacity to do it, and, you know, just keep it going. Any other questions? Yes.
This isn't really a question, but at the beginning of this whole thing, you gave the statistic about how many people, how many Democrats are in favor of socialism versus how many in favor of capitalism. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
Okay. My experience, or my observation, is that the only people in the Democratic Party that matter are the ones that are in the DNC, because they don't care about what their, you know, rank and file or actual members of the Democratic Party think. I mean, if they did, then obviously we'd have a much different country. So what I'm wondering is, what was the statistical breakdown of the DNC when they asked that question?
Good question.
All the more reason why we need a California Progressive Alliance, because we can push the Democratic Party, the DNC, to the left and make space for the conversation that is needed.
So sorry, I thought you were kind of late. I was working late. And you might have covered this, but so in Richmond, 2 questions. When you formed your entity and you're raising money, I know you didn't incorporate or anything, So how do you raise money, and how does that work? How are you able to work on elections that way? And second question, when you were doing door knocking, do you use voter lists or do you knock on every door?
So first on the nature of the entity. So the RPA started out just as a grassroots organization, didn't really have any money. Candidates have to raise money through their own campaign committee. So, you know, that was, the RPA could, you know, hold fundraisers for candidates and such. But they, you know, they have to create their own committee. At this point, the RPA has become an unincorporated association, and that's an entity that allows you to do fundraising. And like, as long as you're volunteers and the fundraising is used for the organization, and you don't go over a certain amount. So it's an unincorporated association. However, my understanding from being in touch with some current steering committee members, it's in the process of changing to a 501c4. So, you know, they think that's a good move. A 501c4 can continue to endorse candidates, but it has some other aspects to it that, you know, is beneficial to the group. I don't know all the aspects of it. Yeah, and the California Progressive Alliance, I just put in the paperwork for unincorporated association. I don't know if we'll want to change to something else, but we need to, you know, fundraise. So to get a bank account, you have to have some state entity, and, you know, people want to write to the California Progressive Alliance, and that goes right to the bank account. But we needed to have that state entity. What was the other thing?
Oh, just about the canvassing that you've done up there.
Yeah.
Use the
Yeah.
voter list.
So, you know, we started out really pretty much doing every door. Then in some campaigns, we started just doing voters, and then sometimes targeting frequent voters. But I think what I think I've heard, like from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is that her campaign was knocking on every door. And I think there's some lesson in that, you know, I mean, that really, and registering new people. So I don't know where the current campaigns, what they're doing, because I'm focused on the statewide effort, but I think they may be doing more door knocking on every door than they used to, because it seems like that has provided some fruitful results. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Just want to make sure everyone